Well, my name is Marah Shai, and actually that is the name that I chose when I became Discalced Carmelite Secular a few years ago, well, some years ago. And my name before that was Vera Grace. And I wanted something that would be more expressive of my life. And Marah, of course, is from the book of Exodus, where, you know, when the Israelites left Egypt, you know, after they crossed the Red Sea, and they came to a desert of Shur, and there was no water. They were 3 days in the desert. And so they came to this place called Marah. And the water was bitter. And so Moses called upon the Lord. And the Lord said, well, there's a special wood there, and you can throw that into the water. And it became sweet. So I saw that as analogous to my life. You know, we all have problems in our life, you know, some bitter things. And when we turn to the Lord, our lives turn around. So that was one facet of it. The second part, Shai, is from, it's actually a Hebrew name. It's a boy's name, and it's gift. And we're all gift for one another. And so that's why I chose that. My other name, of course, it had a lot of good things to it too, you know. Vera is truth, and grace, we know what grace is. And so I was born in Scottsbluff, and now I live in Gering. But after I finished school, I moved away, and eventually I ended up in Vermont. And I lived there for many years, several years. I became a pastoral associate for a few years. I became also religious ed coordinator. The pastor died, and then I moved to Alaska. And I worked in Anchorage for several years. I was an associate there with the director. And it's the Alaska chapter of the American Medical Association. And after that, I moved to Nome to work with the Jesuits, doing work on the radio. That was a Jesuit mission. I worked there for a while. I can't recall whether this was before or after. I was in the Peace Corps, and I worked in Ecuador. I went to the Antilles, worked there as a Peace Corps volunteer, doing teaching and doing different things there. Well, I would say that it was probably in my early 20s. I was living in Lincoln. I think at that time is when I began attending daily Mass. And so it was because I lived near to the cathedral there. And there was so much going on there that that sort of, you know, gave me enhancement, you know, of the Eucharist, and enhancement of growing in my faith. I would say that it was some spiritual directors that I had. They were more concerned about, you know, my life, and the fact that I knew little about my life, my faith, because I had spiritual directors when I was living in Lincoln, and then later on. I wanted to join the Carmelites, the cloistered Carmel. But you know, they only have a certain amount of vocations that they can accept in a year. If someone dies, well then maybe they'll accept you. You have to wait for that. Because it dates back to St. Teresa, who said, well, we'll only have 13, in our cloisters at a time. And so that's the way it is. So then I decided, well, okay, I'll become a secular Carmelite. And that's what I did. Became a secular Carmelite, Discalced Carmelite. And discalced, of course, you know what that means, without shoes. But we have shoes anyway. And so when I joined them, of course, we have 6 years of formation. What I was doing in there, I taught, St. John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, and things like that. So was it Seneca that said, we learn by teaching? Well, that's how I learned, of St. Teresa, the background story, and St. John of the Cross and some of the other saints. When I was accepted to the order, then at the time that it was, we had to choose a name that we would accept as our Carmelite name. I couldn't believe that no one would have chosen Saint Elijah. He dates back to the 9th century, of Carmelites. And so I snapped him up right away. And so I'm Marah Shai of Saint Elijah in the order, of course. I don't use that, normally. My mother and I didn't have a good relationship, and so Our Lady didn't mean anything to me. She did not, until now. And she is something that for me, she has brought me through a lot of things, because when I was in various places, there were many risks that I had. One time I was carried away by the current, out in the Caribbean. And just by the grace of God, there was a couple of men and a little boy that saw that I was in the current, and they came down, even though they weren't supposed to be there. And I was swimming away, and I thought, well, maybe if I swim, sideways, I can get out of this. But they came and they rescued me. It was something that I really enjoyed doing, because I knew that I was taking Christ, to each person. I was taking Christ, and I was handling Christ, and that was the thing that really, really made me stronger, I think, in recognizing what it is that the Eucharist is, for people and for myself. And so the Eucharist, for me, living without Christ, is a fearful thing, as far as I'm concerned. I just pray every day that I will persevere in the things that I do and in my life, persevere in my faith, first of all. That's what I ask of the Lord each day. Our worship should be in terms of what we do in sacrifice, rather than what we say, in the way of prayers. Sometimes I think that we get involved in just saying too many prayers, saying and saying, and not really thinking about what we are saying to the Lord. And you know, it reminds me of what our Lord told us. He says, don't think that by babbling off like the pagans, you know, you're going to have a hearing. He says, people are far, their hearts are far from me at times. And so that's what I would say to the people, you know, to think about when you are at Mass, when you receive, you know, our Lord in Holy Communion, that you think about those things, you know, in your heart. Don't be so quick to start talking right away, right after you receiving the Eucharist. Spend some time thinking, you know, about Him and telling Him how much you love Him, and ask Him to help you to love Him more. You know, that's what I would say.